So I'm in this other article, great article, says here America's first polymer scientist, rubber processing, use and transport in Mesoamerica. This is by Michael J. Tarkanian and Dorothy Hustler. References to rubber balls are abundant in the Popol Vuh, all right, in the Popol Vuh, in which the ball game plays a central role in the story of the heroes Hunampu and Shabalanque and their fathers. Right, these are the twin heroes, right? One Hunampu and seven Hunampu. The repeated references to rubber balls in the Popol Vuh make clear that this material was sufficiently embedded in the world of the classic Maya to constitute a primary theme in that work. Right? It was very important, talking about rubber balls in ball games, which explains the origin of the universe and the human species. They used a game. You understand? There's a foundation behind sports, behind games. It didn't just pop out of nowhere. Like they tell you growing up, if you go to a professor, tell them, yeah, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, we're gonna read that. All right, so you can see the hijack. But we're gonna get the facts first. So you know how to dodge the hijack. All right. Again, it's all over the Popol Vuh. This is like their so-called Bible. This is one of their sacred books, and it's all up in there, and it helps with explain the origins of the universe and the human species. A ball game. All right. So I'm gonna read from this book. It's called Games of the North American Indians by Stuart Cullen. So I'm in the introduction of this book, and it says here the games of the American Indians may be divided into two general classes. First, games of chance, and second, games of dexterity. Games of pure skill and calculation, such as chess, are entirely absent. The Indian games of chance fall into two categories. One, games in which implements of the nature of dice are thrown at random to determine a number of numbers, and the sum of the counts is kept by means of sticks, pebbles, etc., or upon an abacus or counting board or circuit. 2. Games in which one or more of the players guess in which of the two or more places an odd or particularly marked lot is concealed, success or failure resulting in the gain or loss of counters. The games of dexterity may be enumerated as 1. Archery, and various modifications. 2. A game of sliding, javelins, or darts upon the hard ground or ice. All right, ice. There we go. That's where we get the hockey from. All right. A game of shooting at a moving target consisting of a netted wheel or a ring. All right, a netted wheel or a netted what? Ring. A ring, a round ring, and a net. 4. The game of ball in several highly specialized forms. Ball games. All right, in many different forms. 5. The racing games, more or less related to and complicated with the ball games. In addition, there is a subclass related to the games of shooting at a moving target, at which it is a miniature and solitaire form, corresponding to the European game of cup and ball. Games of all classes designated are found among all the Indian tribes of North America. All right, all of them had games and constitute the games par excellence of the Indians. Children have a variety of other amusements, such as top spinning. All right, tops. I don't know if you guys ever played throwing the tops on the floor. We do that a lot where I'm from in Costa Rica. Mimic fights and similar imitative sports. But the games first described are played only by men and women, or youth and maidens, not by children, and usually at fixed seasons as the accompaniment of certain festivals or religious rites. There is no evidence that any of the games described were imported into America at any time, either before or after the conquest. On the other hand, they appear to be the direct national outgrowth of Aboriginal institutions in America. All right? Very important. So don't say that they learned this from other people, foreigners, Europeans coming here and teaching them. No, this is something they created here in America, the Aboriginal people. They show no modifications due to white influence other than the decay which characterizes all Indian institutions under existing conditions. And we know nowadays to not just think of what Europeans as white, but as European influence, not just white like a people, a complexion. Because we know that there was many hundreds of thousands of black Europeans that got sent over here during colonial times, in every form, in every way, as colonists, conquistadors, indentured servants, convicts, prisoners of war, etc., just like the pale-skinned European as well, in all those forms. All right, so again, didn't mean to get off subject here, but very important. You know, when they say white influence, they mean European influence, outside, anybody coming in. It is probable, however, that the wide dissemination of certain games, for example, the hand game, is of comparatively recent date due to wider and less restricted intercourse through the abolition of tribal wars. Playing cards and probably the simple board game called by the English Nine Men's Morris are among the few games borrowed by the Indians from the Europeans. Not whites, Europeans. On the other hand, we have taken their lacrosse in the north and racket in the south. All right, lacrosse, racket, and the Mexicans on the Rio Grande play all the old Indian games under the Spanish names. You hear that? They switched it up. They took the names and they created their own names for these sports. But these were Indian games that they were playing, and now under the Spaniard names. Continues as references to games are of common occurrence in the origin myths of various tribes. They usually consist of description of a series of contests in which the demiurge, the first man, the culture hero, overcomes some opponent and foe of the human race by exercise of superior cunning skill or magic. So imagine that, right? Always in these myth creation stories, they're playing some kind of sport, or the guy, the hero, or these people are showing some kind of skills or magic or superior powers. Comparison of these myths not only reveal their practical unity, but disclose the primal gamblers as those curious children, the divine twins, the miraculous offspring of the sun, who are the principal personages in many Indian mythologies. They live in the east and in the west. They rule night, day, winter, and summer. They are the morning and evening stars. Their virgin mother, who appears also as their sister and their wife, is constantly spoken of as their grandmother, and is the moon or the earth, the spider woman, the embodiment of the feminine, principle in nature, always contending they are the original patrons of play, and their games are the games now played by men. All right, so remember, this could almost mean like also like deities, right? Or like how the Greeks symbolize, right, the Atlanteans and Mount Olympia, these gods playing sports and games. Well, now and all of a sudden it started being played by men, just like they're saying here. The significant emblems of the twins are their weapons. These consist of throwing club made of heavy wood, their bows and cane arrows, the bows interchangeable with a lance, and a netted shield. These objects are distinguished one from the other by their markings, which again are commonly foretold, one pair referring to one of the twins and one to the other. In this fourfold division we find included those other interrelated twins of whom mention has been made. Game and implements are almost exclusively derived from these symbolic weapons. Now you hear that? For example, the stick dice are either arrow, shaft, or miniature bows. All right, and similar origin may be asserted for the implements used in the hand game and in the four-stick game, counting sticks in general, and sticks for the stick game are arrows. The engraved and painted tubes used in the guessing game are arrows shaftments. In the games of dexterity, we find again bows and arrows, and the netted shield with bows. Snow snakes are either the club, the bows, or arrows. Ball seems to be less sure, but the racket may be referred to the net shield. The painted sticks of the kicked billet race are miniature bows. The opposing players are frequently the representatives of the two war gods. We find game and implements as things pleasing to the gods among the objects sacrificed upon the altar of the twins in Sunyi. So I see how they're letting you know how that story of the twins and what they're using in that myth and the implements, the bow and arrow, how significant it is in creating and helping establish these games and the use of sticks and all that, and where they get the origin from. Because a lot of these ancient so-called, civilizations, they'll tell you, oh yeah, they had these sports, but they will never tell you how they created this, where did they come up with these, the concept of a ball, or why you're shooting or kicking the ball in the net. You know what I mean? So, when you read the origins of everything here on this side of the world, especially, you'll see that there are a lot of the times they have the origin myth story to it. It did not just come out of nowhere. There's an origin to it. Under the general name of ball, I have classed all ball games, howsoever played, and all games in which an implement and analogous to a ball is employed. In none of them, with trifling exceptions which belong to distinct classes, is the ball ever touched with the hand, to do so being strictly forbidden by the rules of the game. All right, so very important. A lot of these ball games, you didn't use the hand. All right, the Indian ball games may be classified as follows. First, racket, in which the ball is tossed with a racket. Second, shiny, in which the ball is struck with a club or bat. All right, sounds like baseball, right? Shiny. Third, double ball, a game chiefly confined to women, played with two balls or billets tied together, tossed with a stick. Fourth, the ball race, in which a ball or stick is kicked. All right, a ball is what? Kicked, right? Soccer, or with a stick, like field hockey. In addition, subsidiary to the preceding and not general, being confined to a few tribes, we have fifth, football. Sixth, hand and football. Seventh, toss ball. Eighth, juggling. And ninth, hot ball. All right, so when they mean football, they really mean using your foot. All right, because then they also have the hand and foot ball, so you can use your hands. All right, so just a reminder, again, we're in the Encyclopedia of American Indian Contributions to the World, 15,000 years of inventions and innovations, facts on file, Library of American History. All right, so before we continue, I just want to show this guy real quick. Look at him holding that ball. He's a baller, man. Look how he's holding that. Say hi! Or he's just holding the basketball, right? The bouncy ball, right? It says here, this hollow clay whistle in the shape of a Maya ball player shows him holding a rubber ball. Again, shows him holding a rubber ball. Rubber balls that American Indians made before contact with Europeans have been found throughout Mesoamerica. So of course we already know balls and rubber was made here, Mesoamerican cultures. The Olmec were the first people to produce and play with rubber balls, spherical objects that are widely used in many sports and games today. Alright, so again, this book, this encyclopedia is a little outdated. It's not from 2015, and that's what the new research you're going to see. It's all over the internet, and you can Google it after you view the information. A rubber ball dated to 1000 BC has been found in the Olmec site of La Venta. Rubber is made from the sap of latex of a tree indigenous to the area. The Olmec was cultural flourished from 1700 BC to 400 BC, were the first to manufacture objects made of rubber. They and later The Maya and Aztec made hollow and solid rubber balls that were used for playing a team sport on huge ball courts. See also basketball. The Maya culture rose in about 1500 BC. The Aztec Empire was established in about 1100 AD. Rubber balls were so highly valued that the Codex Mendoza, an Aztec book of accounts, listed 16,000 rubber balls being paid by the coastal provinces to the Aztec emperor. 16,000 rubber balls. This is from here. It says here one version of Mesoamerican basketball was played with a solid rubber ball that varied in size from 2 to 10 inches in diameter. This version could produce bodily damage without the protective gear worn by players. Even with paddling, ball players were not immune from bruises and other injuries because in one version of the game they could use only their shoulders, thighs, knees, head, and hips to hit the ball in order and get it through a high hoop. The hollow rubber ball was lighter and bounced higher. Spaniards who observed the game and the technology for making the balls introduced rubber balls to Europe. An olmec modification of the hollow rubber ball, the rubber bulbed syringe, was used to administer medication and for enemas. All right. So again, rubber balls, that's from here. All right. Ball games, again, as you can see here, was from here. It says here the origin and development of the Caribbean ball and dance court. Birgit Faber Morse says an abstract says the Caribbean ball game was first observed by the Spanish conquistadors and chroniclers on the island of Hispaniola and subsequently in Puerto Rico. It was the Tainan custom that evoked the greatest interest among them. They were amazed by its sporting and ceremonial features. Las Casas writes that in Hispaniola, the game was played on a clean, swift clearing, which was usually rectangular, about 3 times longer than wide, and fenced by low mounds. All right, they had the mound walls, you hear that, on the longer sides. Oviedo tells us about the existence of enclosures called pates, enclosures, where the ball game and other ceremonies were carried out. They had their own ball courts. They were usually located outside the chief's or cacique's house, which was built on the best sites in the villages. All right, cacique had to have the ball court next to him. All right. He adds that the spectators sat on stones about the court while the caciques used wooden stools called dujos. Both narrators mentioned that when the game began, the teams took their places on the court, which was divided in half by a line that no player could cross. Each team would have from 10 to 30 players. Both men and women participated, but teams normally comprised a single sex. The ball was so solid and heavy that if hit, it could split and sprain a hand. And also state that the ball was hit by the hips, shoulders, and other parts of the body, but never with the hands. The purpose was to keep the rubber ball bouncing. Points were lost if it rolled or went dead. Both Oviedo and Las Casas remarks have been extended to cover Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. All those places, same ball court, same game. A French source from the early 17th century, Jean-Pierre Moore also mentions the ball game being placed among the Carib Indians on Martinique in the Lesser Antilles. As the early explorers advanced to the mainland of South America and Mexico, they found the rubber ball game played in a way that they recognized from the Antilles. Further expansion into Central and South America brought forth variation of the game. In Mexico, the game and its players are described and illustrated in the pre-conquest codices like the Borgia and the Fejervari Mayor, and later by the Quiche Maya in the Popol Vuh. The historians of the conquest like Duran and Sahagún noticed the importance of the game among the local population and compared it with the game they had observed in the Greater Antilles. There was a relatively high development in the technology of rubber among the Indian tribes in the Amazon region of South America, and therefore it must have been a favorable environment for the development of the rubber ball. The ball game was played among the tribes who lived in the area, extending from northwestern Venezuela to the tropical zone in Bolivia and Paraguay. The most valuable account was given by Father Comilla in his writing about life among the Otomacs living along the upper Orinoco River in Venezuela. Again, ball games, ball courts, all this stuff happening all over the Americas. All right, guys, understand that now? Again, here it says the classic Maya ball game and its architectural setting. It's by study of relations between text and image, Mary Ellen Miller and Stephen D. Houston. All right. The Mesoamerican ball game has long been a subject of fascination for the European and modern viewer. At the time of the conquest, Spanish conquistadors admired the skill and stamina of the Aztec athletes who played the vigorous game. Even the rubber ball, with its greater ability to bounce than any other material then known to man, was a wonder to a world that had never before known this material. So again, it was a wonder to a world that had never before known this material. European games played with a ball were greatly transformed by the incorporation of the rubber ball. They were transformed. They weren't playing no ball games before that. What ball they playing with? Rocks? I mean, they had games. We know that. I mean, these are people. Children play, right? But they didn't get their games fully transformed, their balls, so-called balls, until they incorporated the rubber balls that they picked up, they learned while they came to the Americas. From the Quiche Maya epic tale, the Popol Vuh, the ball game was also understood to be crucial to the Maya of highland Guatemala at the time of the conquest. The Popol Vuh, two pairs of brothers, play the ball game against the lords of the underworld. The elder pair, Hun Hunampu and Vukub Hunampu, are defeated and sacrificed in the game. The underworld gods hang Hun Hunampu's severed head in a calabash, 3 nearby. A daughter of an underworld lord sits under the tree and receives spittle from the desiccated head, which impregnates her. She flees to the surface of the earth, where she is delivered of twins, Hunampu and Shabalanque, the hero twins of Maya legend. Like Hercules, they are demigods. And like Hercules, they overcome the nether regions. As adolescents, they discover their father's ball-playing gear. Here we go again with ball playing. And cause such a ruckus that the underworld deities command them to their court. Ultimately, through a series of wily tricks, the hero twins outsmart the underworld lords, not only defeating but also dismembering them. The twins then leave the underworld to take their places as heavenly bodies. All right, this goes all the way back to the Popol Vuh, the creation story. See how deep this is, right? Ball games, sports, competition. It's deep in the history of America. So we're going to get into this book, The Indians of the Southeastern United States by John R. Swanton. Okay, Classics of Smithsonian Anthropology, all right? The principal game played in the area under consideration was a variety of that which has been borrowed by whites in a modified form and goes by the name of lacrosse. Lacrosse, however, was adopted from the Algonquin Indians about the Great Lakes, who used but a single stick, whereas the Southern Indians used 2 sticks. These were similar in general pattern to our lacrosse sticks, each being bent over at one end to form a loop which, with the addition of cross courts, formed a cage in which the ball could be caught and held. The game was between 2 parties, usually representing distinct moieties, towns, or occasionally tribes. And each had a goal, to which it was the object of the side to bring home the ball, all right? We're talking about goals just like in soccer and football, right? Goals at each end, where you gotta bring the ball. Apparently, it was not a prominent element in the culture of the Algonquin tribes of the seaboard, but Strachey has the following brief reference to it. Now listen to this: a kind of exercise they have often amongst them, much like that which boys call bandy, the name of a bat with which the ball was struck in English. Except for the Caddo, the game appears to have been played by all the Southern Indians, and it was very likely known to the Caddo, although we have no description of it. We cannot indeed speak with assurance regarding the Florida Indians, nor many smaller groups, for which there is little information of any kind. Even in the case of the Eastern Sioux tribes, our references are confined to Peter Martyr's statement, based on conversation with the Indian Francisco of Chicora, that the latter's people played tennis. All right,
tennis. And Lawson's mention of a game with a baton and a ball, like our trap ball. All these games originated here in the Americas, guys. The latter may be intended as a description of the single pole ball game. But if the Spaniard understood his Indian correctly, the southern type of lacrosse must have been known. Article says ball courts, competitive games, and the emergence of complex society by Warren D. Hill, BA in Rhodes College, 1988, Masters of the University of Calgary, 1992, a dissertation submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in the Faculty of Graduate Studies, Department of Anthropology and Sociology. The epigraph alludes to the close relationship between complex societies and the competitive ball game. At the time of Spanish conquest, a variety of ball games were played throughout Mesoamerica. Most of these games were played in a highly organized fashion in masonry ball courts by members of state-level societies. Some of ball players were tantamounts of today's professional athletes and enjoyed special rights and privileges. So just like today, we got the LeBron James. What they're trying to compare here is that if you were really good and talented, you were treated just like a professional athlete is treated today. Though occasionally these came at a high price, much of what we know about the ball game as it was played in formal ball courts comes from eyewitness accounts of Spanish clerics. About a dozen such accounts are available, the majority of them dating to the 16th century. Most of them describe the Aztec version of the ball game, though one account from the 17th century mentions the ball games of the Maya. Among peoples of the Caribbean, most likely Taino, and in the northwest Mexico. All right, so even in the northwest or southwest U.S. and in the Caribbean, talking about ball games there too. We already got the accounts. Obviously, when the Spaniards got to the Caribbean, they saw them playing the ball games first. Is this one. Notes on the early settlements of the Northwestern Territory. Jacob Burnett. All right, this is from 1847, but he wrote that again in the 1790s. Let's see, this is about page 67, 68. On one of the journeys of the court and bar to Detroit, they arrived at the Ottawa town on the Auglaize about the middle of the day and accepted an invitation to remain there till the next morning. Blue Jacket, the Shawnee chief who commanded in the battle of the 20th of August, 1794, resided at that village, but was then absent. The party, however, were received very kindly by the venerable old Delaware chief, Bukong Gehelas, whose name has been given to a fine mill stream in Logan County. He was one of the chiefs who negotiated the Treaty of the Mouth of the Big Miami with General George R. Clark in 1786, in which his name is written Bohong Gelas. In the course of the afternoon, he got up a game of football. This is the who? The Delaware chief. And where are they again? You guys been following? When they were going towards Detroit, they arrived at Ottawa town. All right, this is the area they're in. And the Delaware chief was there. And he said, hey, quick game, football, for the amusement of his guests, in the true Aboriginal style. Not European style. He selected 2 young men to get a purse of trinkets made up to be the reward of the successful party. That matter was soon accomplished, and the whole village, male and female in their best attire, were on the lawn, which was a beautiful plain of 4 or 5 acres, in the center of the village, thickly set in blue grass. At each of the opposite extremes of this lawn, 2 stakes were set up about 6 feet apart. All right, we got a field. It's game time. The men played against the women, and to countervail the superiority of their strength, it was a rule of the game that they were not to touch the ball with their hands on the penalty of forfeiting the purse, while the females had the privilege of using their hands as well as their feet. So again, guys, the females, they're able to carry it with their hands, just like in football. The men had to do their feet. So I was actually picturing this. I was like, that's interesting to try that out, man. A couple guys, a couple of my friends, play against some females, and they can use their hands. It actually is pretty hard. It's actually pretty hard when the other person can use their hands. It's not the same. So it's pretty interesting. All right, so they're able to carry with their hands, while the females had the privilege of using their hands again, as well as their feet. They were allowed to pick up the ball and run, pick up the ball and run, and throw it as far as their strength and activity would permit, and throw, just like a quarterback. So if they see one of their teammates open near the goal, they would throw it, just like you see the concept in rugby, right? When they're carrying it and passing it to the side and passing, trying to get to the goal. Same concept. But picture, they can throw it anywhere they want, as far as they could throw it. So imagine they probably had already the best thrower in the team. She was always sought for. She became the quarterback, right? She was like, oh, give it to her, and then run. And you got somebody that's the fastest and the best at catching. But you got your wide receivers. This is what I'm trying to show you, right? So you can imagine these are different type of women. Like, it's not these women in these times did a lot. All right, they weren't just they were tough too, and they were probably really good at this. They were probably really skillful. And imagine they had to play against men, so they had to be. And the men ain't just gonna be aboard and have an easy game. So that's why. So it must have been competition. So I'm just for you to picture it, right? So again, they're able to pick up the ball, run, and throw it as far as the strength and activity would permit. When a squad succeeded in getting the ball, the men were allowed to seize, whirl her around, and if necessary, throw her on the grass for the purpose of disengaging the ball. That's a tackle. All right, that's a tackle. That's a tackle. All right? They were allowed to what? Whirl her around, and if necessary, throw her on the grass, get her down, tackle her on the purpose of disengaging the ball. Maybe they can cause a fumble, taking care not to touch it except with their feet. All right? Or a sack. There you go. But imagine, so they're doing the tackling, and then they can't even grab it. They got to start playing with their feet. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. The contending parties arranged themselves in the center of the lawn, the men on one side and the women on the other, each party facing the goal of their opponents. The side which succeeded in driving the ball through the stakes at the goal of their adversaries were proclaimed victors and received the purse to be divided among them. All things being ready, the old chief came on the lawn, and saying something in the Indian language not understood by his guests, threw up the ball between the lines of the combatants and retired. When the contest began, the parties were pretty fairly matched as to numbers, having about 100 on a side, and for a long time the game appeared to be doubtful. The young squaws were the most active of their party and most frequently caught the ball, when it was amusing to see the struggle between them and the young men, which generally terminated in the prostration of the squaw upon the grass before the ball could be forced from her hand. They're saying usually ended up with them getting tackled. The contest continued about an hour with great animation and various prospects of success, but was finally decided in favor of the fair sex by the Herculean strength of the mammoth squaw, who got the ball and held it in spite of the efforts of the men to shake it from the grasp of her uplifted hand. Still, she approached the goal, near enough to throw it through the stakes. All right, so she threw it to the stakes after she got near. So they're saying the women beat the men. All right. When he witnessed that game, the women won. Just so you know. All right, so I want to get into this article now. This is part of chapter 13 of another book here. It says Sport and Ritual as Social Bonding, the Communal Nature of Mesoamerican Ball Games by Mariske Maureen Stoll and David S. Anderson. Fair use. And it says, in this chapter, we argue that archaeological evidence from our own research in the Mexican states of Oaxaca and Yucatan, as well as re-examination of other examples of ball court architecture throughout Mesoamerica, suggests that primary role of ball games was in community building. All right, community building. This is the primary role, community building, rather than solely as an element of elite political theater, as the dominant paradigm would have us believe. In the famous Quiche Maya legend of the Popol Vuh, the ball game was the chosen method of combat between the hero twins and the Lord of the Underworlds. They said, let's do it in a ball game. Winner takes all. The ball game is also often linked with rituals of ascension and the legitimation of authority between elites. Examples of conflict, competition, and legitimation via the ball game can be seen in the stories about the ascension of the post-classic mystic cultural hero Lord Eight Deer. The game is argued to be an outlet for social aggression, inter-elite competition, a substitute for warfare, all right, a substitute for warfare, and a way to avoid or terminate interpolity conflict. There are also the modeled ball courts that show games in progress. These ceramic models depict eye-shaped ball courts with more or less vertical walls and side benches, surrounded by 2 to 4 steep structures. Incredibly, spectators are shown seated on these structures and include men and women, musicians, embracing lovers, and even umpires. Even umpires. Are you listening to this? 2 opposing teams of 2 or 3 ball players are on court, some wearing gloves, shin straps, helmets, or conical bills, with anywhere from 1 to 4 balls in play. The generally populist nature of these figurine models clearly shows games as celebratory communal traditions rather than an elite dominated or controlled activity. So everybody was doing it. It wasn't just the elites. And listen to this, all right? Anybody from this region, anybody who feels connected to this region, listen to this, all right? This is my ancestor here included. It says, to be Mesoamerican was to play ball, whether you were an elite or a commoner.
The Indians of the Southeastern United States by John R. Swanton. Football, all right, was more in evidence in the Powhatan country, according to Strachey. Football, what type of football here? It says they have the exercise of football, in which they only foreseeable encounter with the foot. They're talking about soccer, to carry the ball on the foot, the one from the other, and spurn yet to the goal with a kind of dexterity and swift footmanship, with great footmanship, all right, which is the honor of white, is that WT, but they never strike up one another's heels as we do, and they don't even be kicking each other. They know how to play it. We don't. We be kicking each other. Not a content that praiseworthy to purchase a goal by such an advantage. All right, we're talking about some Southeastern Indians with some swift footmanship. All right, that goes into football too, you know, with the swift footmanship, you know, dodging the tackles and all that. From Spellman, it seems that there was a men's and women's football game they used beside football play, which women and young boys do much play at. And so we've gone over this in the previous parts, how women actually played a lot of sports. They participated. There was mixed gender games, and sometimes it was just for women, but they played and participated a lot in the sports. So again, young boys and women here says they make the goals as ours, only they never fight nor pull one another down. The men play with a little ball, letting it fall out of the hand and striketh it with the top of his foot. And he that can strike the ball furthest wins. That they play for. The common type of ball game was well known to Cherokee, Creeks, Chickasaw, and Choctaw. All right, so dodge the hijack with the names that Europeans gave all these people, right? But we know who they're talking about. And of course, to the Seminole. It had an important place in the social and ceremonial life of each of these tribes. The Cherokee sticks were somewhat less than 2 feet in length, and the netting was of twisted squirrel skin or Indian hemp. All right, Indian hemp. The ball was made of deer hide and covered with the skin of the same animal. As known to Mooney's informants, each of the goals was made by driving a pair of sticks into the ground, but an early writer, Reverend George White, describes the goals as 100 yards long and marked out by 2 parallel lines of poles, the lines being also separated by a distance of 100 feet. Almost like 100 yards, 100 feet, huh? A goal was counted when the ball was driven between the 2 posts. In the former case, or
carried, or again, listen to this, guys, football, right? American football, right? North American, or carried, carried across, carried across either line. And the latter, again, how do you score? How do you make a goal? All you got to do is drive the ball between the two posts. You got to carry it. All right. Mooney says that the common number of players on a side was 9 to 12, and that 22 was the most anyone had ever heard of. 22, huh? Don't they do that in football? 22? But White affirms there was 50 on a side. All right, 50. Yo, that's like what? Isn't like defense, offense? There you go. Mooney says that they played for 12 points. It's the principal navigations, voyages, traffics, and discoveries of the English nation, made by sea or overland to the remote and farthest distant quarters of the earth at any time within the compasses of these 1600 years, divided into 3 several volumes. All right, so this is from Richard Haliouk in the Haliouk Collections. It says here, the 21st of August, the master sent a boat on shore for wood with 6 of his men, and there were 130 of the people of the country which went on shore to them. They went about to kill them, as we thought, for they shot their darts towards them, and we that were aboard the ship did see them go on shore to our men. Whereupon the master sent the pinnace after them. Pinnace, that could be maybe a dog. And when they saw the pinnace coming towards them, they turned back, and the master of the pinnace did shoot off a caliber to them the same time, but hurt none of them, for his meaning was only to put them in fear. Diverse times they did wave us on shore to play with them at the football. So even though they're like trying to kill them and everything, they're trying to get them to come play a game of football, right? So this is diverse times they did wave us on shore to play with them at the football. And some of our company went on shore to play with them, and our men did cast them down as soon as they did come to strike the ball. And thus much of that which we did see and do in that harborough where we arrived first. So I don't think that means that they pretended to go play with them, and then as soon as they came to play, they cast them down. They killed them. This is in 1586. That was going to be the first scrimmage, the first match between Indians and Europeans, supposedly. They didn't even get a chance to. They just killed them. They said, we won. We ain't playing. We're in the book Games of the North American Indians by Stuart Cullen, or Cullen. The Thompson Indians, British Columbia. They were fond of games like their neighbors and utilized the level grassy river benches for various games of ball. One of these games, Sukul Lilaka, was not unlike our own game of football. The players were divided, as with us, into 2 groups, and in each end the field was a goal formed by 2 poles planted several feet asunder. They play commenced from the middle of the field, and the object was to get the ball through the goal of their adversaries. The ball was made from some kind of tree fungus cut round and covered the elk hide. So it says here, football. It says here, information concerning the game of football is extremely meager and unsatisfactory. The specimens commonly designated as footballs by collectors are, as a matter of fact, intended mostly for the game of hand and football. Hand and football. Or the ball race. Football is mentioned as occurring among the 4 Algonquin tribes: Massachusetts, Micmac, Narragansett, and Powhatan. It is spoken of also among Wyandot, the Catawba, the Eskimo, Chukchansi, Toping Gugim, the Akomawi, the Nishinam, Shokomish, the Mono, the Paweti, and Washo. The game was played by men, Micmac, Paweti, by men and women, opposed, Topina Gugim, and by men, women, and children, Eskimo. The balls were of buckskin, Micmac, Eskimo, Toping Gugim, Achumawi, Nishinam, Mono, the Paweti, or of stone. And so the parentheses are all these tribes that played it. And the goals were 2 sticks, erect, just like modern goals, right? Or placed slantingly. Or lines drawn at the ends of the course, like lines, the goal line, all right? In California game, the ball is kicked by successive players who are lined up along the course. corresponding with a game in which the ball is similarly tossed along the course with curved or spoon-shaped sticks. In one game, men and women are opposed, the men kicking the ball and the women tossing it with flail-shaped baskets. The game appears to be most popular among the Eskimo, with whom in one instance it is complicated by the ball being whipped as well as kicked. It says here in the book the history of travels into Virginia, or British or Britannia, expressing the cosmographic and commodities. This is by William Strachey and Richard Henry Mayer, 1849. Then it says a kind of exercise they have often amongst them, much like that which boys call bandy in English. All right, the sport they're saying is in the game of bandy ball, the ball was struck with a bat called bandy from it being bent. All right, so and maybe an ancient game, as yet seemeth in Virgil. For when Aeneas came into Italy at his marriage with Lavinia, King Latinus' daughter, yet it is said that Trojans taught the Latins skipping the frisking at the ball. The Trojans? Who's the Trojans, guys? Troy was founded by Judah, a line of Judah. Who's the Trojans? So they were teaching the Latins of the indigenous or aboriginal people of that area of Italy called Latins. They taught them how what? Skipping and frisking at the ball. Likewise, they have the exercise of football, in which they only forcibly encounter with the foot to carry the ball, the one from the other, and spurn yet to the goal with a kind of dexterity and swift footmanship. Again, swift footmanship, just like Pele and Messi. Swift footmanship, which is the honor of Jet, but they never strike up one another's heels, and they don't even kick each other, as we do. Not a company that praiseworthy to purchase a goal for such an advantage. The Indians of the southeastern United States by John R. Swanton. There was a variety of this game in which only the hands were employed. All right, only the hands, the ball being larger, and it was connected apparently with football. All right, guys, listen. Only the hands are being used here. Thus, among the Creeks, we hear of a game in which the men and women played against one another, the men being oblique to kick the ball, while the women could use both hands and feet. The Chickasaw called this Towak and seems to have played it in the same manner. The games were for 12 points and continued for 4 days, after which a feast was held. All right, so you see, feasts, celebrations, ceremonies, games, it's part of the culture. The Chickasaw also had a game called Acabato, in which they used a ball as big as a baseball propelled along the ground by means of bent sticks. The goal was made of 3-foot posts placed 2 feet apart, and the bent sticks recalled the chocolate game mentioned by Bosu, except that the latter was played by women against women, whereas in the former men and women were opponents. As in the other, they played for 12 points. Roman tells us of a game played promiscuously by men and women in which they used a ball made of woolen rags which they beat about with their hands. This was perhaps related to the game remembered by the Choctaw of Bayou Lacombe, in which they used merely their hands, and the goals were formed of stakes 10 feet high, a few inches in diameter and 200 feet apart, though the goals remind us of the regular Choctaw game. This handball game seems to have been the only one of this type known to the Natchez, to the warriors, the Natchez. We have descriptions of it by Duprat and Dumont de Montigny, and it was played during the great first fruits ceremony. During the first fruits, all right? When you give the first fruits, corresponding to the Creek busk. Duprat places this in September, but Dumont in July. Presumably it was played at other times, and indeed Dumont implies as much, but we have no other records. On these 2 occasions, numbers of men took part, Dumont stating that there were 800 on each side. What? And this would facilitate the carrying out of one great object of the game, which was to prevent the ball from falling to the ground. You hear that? It couldn't touch the ground. So they had so many people on each side. According to Duprat, it must not be retained in the hand of any player, and you couldn't hold it either. You got to keep hitting it. And if one attempted to hold it, it would be instantly snatched from him. Dumont, on the other hand, makes the ultimate victory depend on the retention of the ball by someone. Dupras tells us that the players were divided into two parties under the Great Sun and the Great War Chief, respectively, the heads of the former being decorated with white feathers and those of the latter with red ones. It began about 9 o'clock in the morning when the two leaders made their appearance and summoned their followers by sounding upon a drum. All right, drum. First, the chiefs threw the ball back and forth for a while until suddenly, all right, they're throwing the ball back and forth to each other. The chiefs, right? They're throwing it back and forth. The chiefs. So again, first the chiefs threw the ball back and forth for a while until suddenly the great sun sent it among the massed participants, and the game was on in earnest. The ball was of the size of the fist and consisted of a piece of deer hide stuffed, according to Dupras, with Spanish moss, and according to Dumont, with sawdust. Dupras states that the object of each party was to make it touch the cabin of its leader. A single tally ended the game, but it usually lasted 2 hours, and Dumont says it sometimes extended for more than 3 hours. Dupras adds that the chief of the losing side made the winners a considerable present, and the latter were permitted to wear distinguishing plums until the following year, or until the next time they played the ball, right? They were champions for a year. The war dance followed this, and afterwards all went to bed. Says Wood's New England's Prospect. Well, he's from the 1600s. This is an 1865 version of it. So it says, and whereas it is the custom of many people in their games, if they see the dice run cross of their cards, not answer their expectations, what cursing and swearing, what imprecations and railings, fightings and stabbings oftentimes proceed from their heavy spleen. You guys hear that? You hear what's going on? How do their blustering passions make the place troublesome to themselves and others? But I have known when 4 of their milder spirits have sit down, staking their treasures, when they have played 24 hours, neither eating, drinking, or sleeping in the interim. Nay, which is most to be wondered at, not quarreling. But as they came thither in peace, so they depart in peace. When he that had lost all his wampum pish, his house, his kettle, his beaver, his hatchet, his knife, yeah, all his little all, having nothing left but his naked self. So they're talking about what we read in the last part. They wagered a lot of bets during games, all right? A lot of bets during games. And people were losing their estates, their houses, their wigwams, all that, all right? Their fields, their crops, probably, all right? So in sports of activity, at football, though they played never so fiercely to outward appearance, yet anger, boiling blood never streams in their cooler veins. If any man be thrown, he laughs out of his foil, all right? If any man be thrown, right? They're playing football. And if he be thrown, he laughs it out. His foil. There is no seeking of revenge. He ain't trying to get mad. It ain't personal. It's just sports. No quarreling. No bloody noses, scratches, faces, black eyes, broken shins, no bruised members or crushed ribs. The lamentable effects of rage, but the goal being won, the good on the one side lost, friend they were at the football, and friends they must meet at the kettle. We're in the book Games of the North American Indians by Stuart Cullen, Massachusetts. William Wood wrote, for their sport of activity, they have commonly but 3 or 4 as football, shooting, running, and swimming. When they play county against county, there are rich goals, all be hung with wampum pinch, Milwaukee's beaver skins, and black otter skins. It would exceed the belief of many to relate the worth of one goal, wherefore it shall be nameless. Their goals be a mile long, placed on the sands, which are even as a board. Their ball is no bigger than a handball, which sometimes they mount in the air with their naked feet. Sometimes it is swayed by the multitude. Sometimes also it is 2 days before they get a goal. Then they mark the ground. They win and begin their next day. Before they come to this sport, they paint themselves, even as when they go to war. in policy to prevent mischief, because no man should know him that moved his patience or accidentally hurt his person, taking away the occasion of study and revenge. So they try to make him unrecognizable, so they don't go seek him after the game. Before they begin, their arms be disordered and hung upon some neighboring tree, after which they make a long scroll on the sand, over which they shake loving hands and with laughing hearts scuffle for victory, while the men play the boys' pipe and the women dance and sing trophies of their husbands' conquests. All being done, a feast summons their departure. It is most delightful to see them play in smaller companies, when men may view their swift footmanship, their curious tossings of their ball, their flouncing into the water, their lubber-like wrestling, having no cunning at all in that kind. One English being able to beat 10 Indians at football. Oh yeah, right. Look at him boosting, talking about one Englishman can beat him. I want to see that. Yeah, I want to see that. Micmac, Nova Scotia says Mr. Stransbury Hagar, Abraham's wife, says the only other Micmac game than the bowl game of which I have learned is Squadigic or football. The goals were of two sticks placed slantingly across each other like the poles of the traditional wigwam. About a score of players divided into two parties faced each other at equal distances from the center of the field. The ball was then rolled in by the umpire, and the object of the game was to kick it between the goal posts. In more recent times, a player may catch his opponent by the neck and thus hold him back until he can obtain the ball himself. But scalping was anciently employed as a means of disposing of an opponent. Man. The Narragansett, Rhode Island. Roger Williams gives Pasuquac wow. It says they meet to football and says they have great meetings of football playing only in summer, town against town, upon some broad sandy shore, free from stones or upon some soft heady plot, because of their naked feet, at which they have great stakings, but seldom quarrel. The Powhatan in Virginia, William Strachey says, we actually read these. Likewise, they have the exercise of football, in which they only forcibly encounter with the foot to carry the ball, the one from the other, and spurned it to the goal with a kind of dexterity and swift footmanship, which is the honor of it. But they never strike up one another's heel, as we do, not a company that praiseworthy to purchase a goal by such an advantage. Real quick, this is the book Relation of Virginia, a boy's memoir of life with the Powhatans and Patawamecs, Henry Spellman. So what happened is he was indentured to the Indians. This is a future video we'll probably get into, his story. But what he's saying, he witnessed a game, I believe. And while he was with them, he witnessed their pastimes, right? When they meet at feast or otherwise, they use sports, much like 2 hours here in England, just like the ones in England, as they're dancing, which is like our Derbyshire hornpipe, a man first and then a woman, and so throw them all, hanging all in around. There is one which stand in the midst with a pipe and a rattle with which, when he begins to make a noise, all the rest giggets about, wringing their necks and stamping on the ground. They use beside football play, which women and young boys do much play at, the men never. They make their goals as ours, only they never fight nor pull one another down. The men play with the little ball, letting it fall out of their hand and strike it with the top of his foot, and he that can strike the ball furthest wins that they play for. We're in the book Games of the North American Indians by Stuart Cullen or Cullen. So here they're talking about the Mokelumnan stock. Dr. J.W. Hudson describes also the following ball game, played between men and women, under the name of Umta. The ball, pushki, consists of an oblate spheroid 4 to 7 inches in diameter, right? Spheroid, guys, come on. Spheroid, covered with buckskin and studded with deer hair. The goals are 2 sets of posts, 3 feet apart and 8 feet high, bent at the top to form an arch. and 600 yards apart. The men are stationed in a line on one side and the women on the other. The starters, 5 men and 5 women, arranged alternately, stand in a line in the center of the field at right angles to the goal course. At a word, a man casts down the ball, and each side tries to secure it. The women must advance the ball with their hands or with a handled basket, a mata, while the men can kick only and must not throw or touch the ball with their hands, nor can they interfere with their hands. The women are very expert and throw the ball long distances. So the women were the quarterbacks. The women were like the ones really playing more like a carrying the ball, like modern football type games in most cases. But I'm sure the men play that. We actually read in times where they have played versions of their own handball amongst men. So again, Dr. J.W. Hudson describes Pasco football. The ball Pasco is oblong, 12 inches in longest diameter, covered with buckskin and stuffed with deer hair. There are 8 players to a side. 1 ball is used. The goal consists of pairs of posts 3 feet apart at the ends of a 1,000-foot course. Rough play is the rule. You got to be rough. As a player is allowed to run with the ball in his hands, boom, an interference is permissible. There you go. Like I said, it's not always just the man playing with their feet. All right? Again, rough play is the rule, guys. Just like in modern football, rugby as well, as a player is allowed to run with the ball in his hands. Case closed. They're playing like modern football. What is the goal? They have to go to the other end, reach the goal line. 1,000-foot course. 1,000-foot course. Man, loving this. All this stuff they didn't teach us growing up. Imagine if we knew this stuff growing up. Skokomish, British Columbia. So again, this was in California, actually. I didn't mention that. The Mono, Hooker Cove, Madera County, California. Ball covered with buckskin filled with hair, 4.5 inches in diameter. Collected by Dr. J.W. Hudson, who describes it as used in a football game called Tanasuk Witokoin. 2 balls are laid on the starting line, Anawi, Anuawe, 20 feet apart. And at a signal, each captain kicks his ball to his partners, who forward it to the goal, Ananakoaina, a hole between the pair of stakes, 350 yards distant. No interference whatever is permitted. Another football game with the same name, Tanasu Witokoin, is played with 1 ball, 7 inches in diameter, which is dropped in the center of the field and kicked or carried in almost the same manner as modern football. The goals are pairs of upright posts, 5 feet between and 400 yards apart. Pujunanstock, the Nishama, California, described the following game. Mr. Stephen Powers, the Posca Hung Tok Kompe, tossing the ball is a boys' game. They employ a round wooden ball, a buckeye, or something standing at 3 bases of corners, and toss it around from one to the other in bases, tossing the ball around in bases. If 2 of them start to change corners and the third crosses out or hits either of them, he scores 1. That sounds almost like baseball, guys. And they count up to a certain number, which completes the game. That's like stealing a base and then trying to hit them with it. Salesian Stock, Thompson Indians, British Columbia. The Lower Thompson had a ball game in which the ball was thrown up by 1 player. The player who caught it ran with it until overtaken by another player. All right? He ran with it. He caught it until somebody can take him down, until somebody can tackle him, who in his turn ran with it until a certain goal was reached. All right? Until they got to the goal line or they get tackled. All right?